That looks like a corporation put it all together. And this looks like neither. This looks like the sort of bookstore you want to spend some time with. So thank you for the bookstore. I'd also like to thank Matt Jowdry, who is the publisher of At Bay. And quite honestly, I thought my last book was pretty good too. And I thought the book before it was good too. The one before that, no, it wasn't very good at all. But I don't think I've made a breakthrough in the quality of the book. I think I've made a breakthrough in the quality of the publisher. And he's put me places that I never expected to be. So I'm very, very lucky to have a good publisher. He also has good editors. So I'm going to be mentioning Paul later, but just for now, this book would probably be fairly incoherent if Paul Truster didn't go through it. But because of Paul, it was a straight line. It made sense. Yet when I handed over to 3 editors, almost all the edits they asked for were worth doing. Sometimes you get editors who just want change for the sake of change. That wasn't these 3 people. They also had a book designer. On the previous 2 books, I was the book designer. And I'm not that, they don't look horrible or anything, but you can separate the wheat from the chaff when you look at this physical book. Hi, Edith. Hi, Ron. You look at this book physically, and it's just a nicer looking book. It looks like the people who did it knew what they were doing. They weren't a talented amateur trying to knock it together for the first time. My intention is to feed you well. I was a school teacher, almost all of you know that. And I went to a professional development session where the guy said, feed your students. If you feed the students, they can't be very mean to you while they're eating. So that's another reason I feel I can speak now, because hey, what's the worst thing you can do while you're eating my food? So, and while I'm talking, if you want to get up and get some more, just get some more. I also have the art gallery up there, and in the gallery, at the far end, you'll see the first pages in the first book I did, which is almost 50 years ago. Then pages from The Geek of the Gods, which was a story which later became the title of a book. Then The Tower of the Comic Book Freaks, which actually did quite well. It sold about triple the level of most of these things. And I'm not a known talent, so I was very happy with the numbers. And then 4 pages from the Cosmicon, which is what I'm here to primarily talk about. And this. Okay, now, if you're wondering about the pacing here, I think I've got 25 things to show you. So I can recognize boredom because I was a school teacher. I bored kids all over the place. And in fact, I've only got one student, Eleni, who just came in. And Eleni, you call yourself Ellen now?
No, it's just a therapist now, so I had to hide
just on Facebook. Okay, I figure I taught about 6,000 kids over all those years. And 5,999 of them decided not to come. Because I bored them. And I don't know what I'm going to do to you, but I'm going to do my best. Now, people near the front can see this well. At the back, you can't. This was my first interaction with the world of art. Can you see who this guy is? Some of you are very knowledgeable. Sam, you can tell who that is. Janice, you might be able to tell who it is too.
I don't have my glasses on.
Oh, that's Norman Rockwell.
That's Norman Rockwell.
Holy cow.
Okay. Do you see this guy who looks a little bit like me? We share about 25% of our genetics. That's my Uncle Phil. And I only met Uncle Phil twice in my life. I only remember being with him once. But what I heard was Phil married, and help me if I'm wrong on this, the granddaughter of Grandma Moses. You know, from Grandma, okay, I've got recollection on Grandma Moses. I would say that Grandma Moses was the foremost naive artist, foremost folk artist in American history. Phil was one weird guy. It's not good to speak badly about people. So I'll just leave it at he was one weird guy. But when he was married to Grandma Moses's granddaughter, it was his third wife, and he was in our living room. And like me, he doesn't hear very well. I've got hearing aids here. But unlike me, he didn't have hearing aids. He felt that he had to yell or nobody would hear him because he couldn't hear himself. So he yelled, "And the next one's going to be even richer." And then he took the flask from the hip and had another shot and continued. That was our Uncle Phil. But this is out of Life magazine.
Wow.
So I had an uncle carrying the 100th birthday cake to Grandma Moses with Norman Rockwell.
Wow.
Yet I was not fated to do this. Generally, I'd say we're a family of scientists and businessmen. Definitely not artists. We've got Edith back there, and Edith is an actor. We get the odd one, but we don't get many at all. And I never thought that I would, when I was a kid, when people said, "What are you going to do?" It wasn't learn to draw. We had one work of art up in the entire house. And just think about this for a minute. When you're a little kid, you don't even know what a work of art is. Unless they're all, like in Mark's house. Mark, I remember going into your place, and you could hardly put your hand against the wall without touching a work of art. So you must have had some appreciation of what all those things were. I didn't. We had one. It was behind the television, because we would watch the television, and what's that thing behind it? Not only did I not know that it was a work of art, a framed work of art, but I didn't know what it depicted. And much later in my life, I can't tell you what year, but I can tell you it was much later in my life, I saw that it was houses, fences, and a wheelbarrow. It mostly depicted the wheelbarrow. It was done in a flat watercolor. This is not the work of art. This is something I found in the basement when we were cleaning out the basement after my parents passed away. And it was, I don't think it's the same artist, but somewhat similar to this. And that was it. And this was in the basement, just packed away. That's number 2. Here's number 3. My father has been dead. My father died January 6th, a date that's easy for our population to remember now. And 49 years ago?
76.
Okay.
1976.
49 years
49
ago.
years ago.
10, 15 years after he died, my mother said, "Dad wanted to be an artist." I had no idea. My father, like so many people of his generation, worked from literally sun up to sundown every single day, never taking a vacation. That's fair? That's what he did. I didn't know he once wanted to be an artist. He certainly never discussed it with me. But my mother pointed me towards this, and I was wondering what wonders I was going to find. But I'll just show you some of them. I imagine my father took a course where they showed him lettering, and he did imitations of the letters that were shown to him. Let's see. Okay, can you tell me what it is? What is it? What is it?
A fan. No.
I don't know. Nice try, Dad.
Bowl with a ball bearing in it, I think.
But my dad would be at least 120 years old now. Again, there are various opinions, but there's evidence that he was born in 1903, which was 2 driver's licenses from New York State, 1904 and 1905. So were he still alive, he'd be quite old. And his art lives on, at least in my portfolio. These, we've got a Greek vase, and we've got an American-style teapot. So to me, I mean, I spent my whole life teaching art. These would be Grade 9, grade 10, kids today. Proportions are a bit off. Shading is not contrasty, but that's what my dad did. Okay. When I was a kid in kindergarten, it's funny what we remember. Every day in the morning, we would do a painting on a full-size sheet of paper. My parents, my elder brother Larry is there. Larry is 11 years, a little more than 11 years my senior, and he can probably remember these things. Steve is also my brother. He's 15 months my junior, and there's no way he could remember these things. But in the hallway, when you walk in, there were 2 nails, and my parents would jam the artwork on top of the 2 nails. And every day, another one would be added to it. Then they'd take them all down. I wouldn't even notice, and they're gone. I've heard John Lennon say, my aunt didn't know I was a genius. She threw out my poetry. Believe me, the things that they threw out, I'm glad they threw them out. This survived. This is from 1961. I would have been in grade 2. And it's my first comic strip. It's called The Dog Roadhog. And it was done on a little pad of paper, kind of a yellowy pad of paper. The pad was almost certainly by the telephone. And it's 10 panels, start, middle, and bit of a climax. A good guy, bad guy. We had comic books coming into the house. That's what we had. And that was definitely my art teacher, the comic books that came in. There was nothing on the wall. But I've got a dog in there, the dog's owner, a dog house, cars, and 2 colors, cross-hatching, parallel perspective. I don't know, I never really taught elementary, so I can't compare it to kids that age. But it's my first evidence of being an artist. Now I'm going to show you something here, which to a guy like me is absolutely beautiful. It remains absolutely beautiful after all these years. There's an artist named John Buscema, and I think you can choose your own word. Elegant, can we go with elegant? They were powerful, they were elegant, probably the best artist of the human body. I mean, we had Frazetta too, but I look at Buscema and say, nobody could do that. Buscema was the best of them. Jack Kirby created a character called the Silver Surfer, and Kirby, being the artist he was, had him as a very powerful god, a godlike creature. And Buscema took a whole different play on him. And when this thing came in, I'd never seen anything quite like it. So I took a thin piece of typing paper and I traced the Silver Surfer, and that was 1968. I was very likely 14 years old. And I thought, I'm an artist. I traced it, right. But this was a step ahead of anything I had done before at age 14. Now, let's see. Now, for most of you are either of my generation or very close to being of my generation. When we were kids, nobody read the book. If you were in school and there was a book, the first thing you did was you found out if Cole's notes or Tom's notes, recognition. We read the Cole's notes or the Tom's notes. You might have read a chapter or two, but and I did read whole books, but very, very few. And there didn't seem to be any correlation between my marks in English and reading the book. So why would I read the book? The other advantage, well, I didn't have an advantage. I had a horrible time trying to get through English class. But there were these things called Classics Illustrated. Yeah. And how many pages is this? I don't know. It's probably 54 pages. So when comic artists went to get jobs, the job could be 20 pages, it could be 6 pages. you rarely got more than 24 pages. I don't think you could get more than 24. But when you got Classics Illustrated, it had the lowest rates in the industry. It's done on a per page payment. But you got your page rate times 54. So they still produce some beautiful work. A lot of artists tend to have a sense of integrity about their work. And even when doing stuff at a low rate, they'll do the best job they can possibly do. And you can find some gorgeous work from Classics Illustrated, but it's quite rare. The people who are doing them were good artists, but if they started doing all the things that made their art look so good, it just wouldn't come out good. It would take forever to do, and they couldn't live that way. So what you got were people who could construct figures very, very well, who could find reference for costumes, historical costumes very well. And they would do line drawings and fill in black. They would never crosshatch, they would never feather. They would just fill in the black and get the thing out and get paid. And we all read them. We liked them very much. And they're the best-selling comics of all time. People don't know this, but they stayed on the stands almost forever. Most comics got pulled off the stands after 2 weeks. These things would stay there as long as it took to sell them. So they sold in the, I don't know if it's billions, but they sold over 1 billion copies, Classics Illustrated. Mm-hmm. When I started drawing, I thought, I don't have enough knowledge or ability to have a style, but I can still construct a figure a little bit. Most of them were like this. I mean, if you can't draw, you try not to show much perspective or motion in your figure. You have them flat, and they talk about talking heads. So you've got one guy standing like this, talking to another guy standing like this, and all that they're doing is talking. And sometimes you can get an awful lot of pages out just doing that. So by the time I was 16, I found out there was a guy stranger than my Uncle Phil. And he worked at a place called Memory Lane. He owned Memory Lane. It was a comic shop. Mm-hmm. A lot of people in my generation remember this. It was a comic shop downtown in Markham Street Village, which has now been leveled for, it has now been leveled for condos. And what George did was he would sold comics for anywhere between 5 cents and, I kid you not, $500. He had a Batman 1 that he was selling for $500. That Batman 1 today could be worth $1 million, certainly close to $1 million. And George was sort of the slave master for all the people who were deep into this. If you wanted to buy old comics or get new comics cheap, you had to go to George. There was nobody else doing it. In fact, I only know of one comic shop in all of North America that existed before George's did. And George had all kinds of people around him who wanted to be comic artists, wanted to be publishers, wanted to be editors. And one of them was a fellow named Mark Siegel. And he was publishing on an inauspicious little magazine called Comic and Crypt. And I've got the cover here of issue 3. I didn't do this. The fellow who did this, I'll put it up high, he was way ahead of me. He had an idea of what he was doing. He was taking back then you could take vocational courses, and most of your course in high school would be towards a vocation like mechanics, carpentry, and his was art. So he was actually learning figure drawing back then. I wasn't good enough for the cover, but I was good enough for the interior of the crypt section. I got a full page of the interior, and it looks kind of like Classics Illustrated. And I look at it myself today. Okay, so I'm never going to be Rembrandt, and I learned a lot after this. But it's okay. You can see what he's doing. The folds aren't bad. His face is believable. The proportions are all right. These are supposed to be gravestones. They go back in perspective reasonably well. So in 2 years, I went from tracing the Silver Surfer to drawing for a page of an amateur magazine. I promise you, I had no unusual talent. What I had was this sounds weird, but I had an understanding of mathematics. When I was drawing things, I still do it. I put sort of a mental grid on top of it, and I compare proportions all over. I can do this reasonably well. I'm not, by copying, I mean, if I had to do it, I didn't take the job. I was once standing on my roof. I was tarring my roof, and my son Paul was probably about 16. He said, "Dad, there's a phone call." And the call was from the Toronto Star. They needed somebody to rush down to the courtroom and do a drawing of some criminal there, alleged criminal. And they said, "Can you do this? We need somebody really fast." And I said, "No, I'm tarring my roof." So they got some of they got Paul McCusker. And McCusker, I'm not bad at this. McCusker's genuinely good at this. So he went down. He did a way better job than I could have ever done, just as well. But I do that. Perspective is very simple for me. It was always very simple. I can understand it. And that's what I had going for me. But I remember kids, I remember a kid, Gary Nash, in grade 9. We had to do self-portraits. Gary Nash's self-portrait looked like Gary Nash. He could just do it. Mine was, I thought mine was pretty good, but there was a kid in the class named Preston Tunis, and he was the alpha male in grade 9. Everybody wanted his attention. So I remember another boy took my drawing and said, "Hey, Preston, look what Ron did." And they had a good laugh over it. So I still think that it was okay. It was nothing special. Now, where am I here? Okay. Eventually, I went into York Fine Arts. York Fine Arts today is a fairly prestigious place. There's no way they let me in today. There's no way. But I got in, and I got in. What they do is they interview you and they look at your portfolio. And I scored fairly well getting into York Fine Arts. As I said, standards have changed. Once I got into York Fine Arts, it was no surprise to find that the people there cared nothing at all about comic art. And I can't tell you, yeah, Mark was in there. That's where Mark and I met, York Fine Arts. I had the odd professor who understood and thought that drawing comics was a noble activity, but very few. As I remember, Mark, abstract expressionism was big at the time. Versions of pop art were big. These things were out of the 1950s, and I was there in the early 1970s. But having been an art teacher, though not at the college or university level, I understand an element of it. What happens is these professors took their own art history years before, and they were basing their programs primarily on what they had been taught themselves. They weren't as familiar with contemporary art as many, so they taught us stuff from the 1950s and 1970. That's okay, I didn't know anything. It took some reflection and discussion to understand this. So what they wanted was something like this. And I did this. And I'm still kind of proud of it. I also learned a lot while doing it. I learned a lot about texturing. I learned a lot about large composition. And if you got a head for these things, I would like to think it's kind of pretty. There's a disorder. When people know very, very little about something, they tend to think they're better at it than they really are. What's that called? Do you remember? You've heard?
Dunning-Kruger.
What? Sorry?
Dunning-Kruger.
That's the one. Yeah, that's the one. So I confess I might have a bit of Dunning-Kruger in me when I compliment myself on the work. But I also say to myself, I ended up with a degree in art history and then a second degree in art education. Can I talk about it when I get a master's degree? I still like it. And that's why I still own it. And this is another one. What I did here was I took a zinc plate, cut it into little squares, threw it in acid, so with some wax protecting areas, rather randomly, and then I inked the plates with both black in the acid bit area, red in the area where that was on top. And then you can't drop them randomly, they've been inked, but I dropped, as I recall, 2 different colors of poker chips on there. Where would it have been 2? Would have been 3 colors of poker chips. Where one color landed, I put a large square. Where another color landed, I put a medium square. And then I put small squares where the third color landed. And I still think it's okay. And I learned a bit about randomness while doing it. So I'm not discounting what we were taught at York. I may have been in the wrong place, but still I went through, and without York, I wouldn't have become a school teacher, and I'm glad I became a school teacher. I had one guy, and what we sometimes had, I remember there was a fellow there named Tim Whiten, and Tim was kind of a famous guy. He was extremely respected. What he used to do was he would take things like tree branches and rocks, and he would put leather over them and then tightly bind the leather together. So you had a leather covering on a rock. I don't know how that sounds to you, but when you see them, it's not bad. You look at it and say, I can get it, yeah. So I used to hitchhike to and from school every day. And I remember Tim picked me up once at the hitchhiking post. And he said, no, you gotta come around this way, because the door to his car on the passenger side did not work. So I had to come around to the driver's side door. He had to step out, and then I had to slide in. And we, of course, reversed the process. So I thought, in art, you can be famous and still be kind of broke. So he couldn't get the door fixed, I guess. I had another teacher, and his name, those of you who are knowledgeable in this, does the name David Bulldog live on?
Yeah, I know that.
Okay. I know for a long time, the Art Gallery of Ontario was distributing leaflets where the front of the leaflet was a work of art by David Bulldog. Quite honestly, I didn't take to his work the way I took to Tim Whiten's, but he was supposed to be a bit of, and I'm not going to pronounce this right, enfant terrible. He was getting work in major galleries at age 18, okay? And he taught at York for just, I think it was 1 semester. And I was lucky to have him. I was lucky because he was the first guy that I talked to there who understood that what I was doing was, if not meaningful to anybody else, was meaningful to me. And David Bulldog gave me an assignment. He said, get a copy of the Arabian Nights. I want 10 illustrations from the Arabian Nights. And hey, I'm in my element. I still have all 10. So I would have been 20 or 21 when I did this. And there's an artist named Jeff Jones. And this Jeff Jones, he goes by a few names. This was meant to be done in his style. His style was easy to imitate. He was a really good artist. His work was easy to imitate poorly. All that you have to do is put a light bulb above something, have these deep shadows, and put just the right amount of texture in the deep shadows. So I don't know if I got just the right amount, but I got enough texture in there to make it all right. And again, as with the York University stuff, this is more York University stuff, I still think it holds up. I don't think it's a bad drawing. Also, the first time I ever had recognition as an artist was in another fanzine that came out of London, Ontario, called Media 5. And they did 4 pages on my artwork, and they reprinted 5 or 6 of these. So it was a big thing for me. Okay. And oh yeah, and this was another one. airbrush color, marker color. There were some artists at the time who were drawing comics whose work looked a lot like N.C. Wyeth and Andrew Pyle, and they were illustrators from the early part of the 20th century or the very, very late part of the 19th century. So I was working in imitation of them. At a certain point, like I wasn't crazy. There were people who were much, much, much better than me at art who were having trouble making a go of it. I was not trained in commercial art, I was trained in fine art. I would have loved to have been a comic book artist, but a comic book, someone at the top of it. If I got into comics, what I would have done was I would have been an inker for some backup stories and been swept out the door within 2 years. That was the best I could even hope for. So at that point, I just wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to be a very, very good teacher. I wanted to be a 24-hour-a-day teacher. And the problem with doing that is, man does not live by bread alone. And no matter how good your intentions are, some students can drive you absolutely out of your mind. And at the school that I was at where Eleni was, I said this to one of my classes, like I could trust them enough to say, I don't know if you understand this, but most of you were born under cabbages, like Cabbage Patch dolls. It was a fairly well-to-do neighborhood. It was the second richest neighborhood in not just that county, but the next county over, which was Peel, and the next county over, which was Hamilton. Most, not all of the students were quite advantaged. And believe me, it was easy to work with. It was easy to work there. But my first 18 years were spent teaching special education. The special ed kids were not necessarily kids who lacked ability, but at that time in their life, things weren't working for them. So at the end of grade 8, they were generally put in General Wolfe High School, that was the name of the place. And we did our best to work with them. For a lot of the kids, all that it was a place to wait. And what were they waiting for? Sometimes a unionized job, sometimes the love of a good woman. But they were waiting. And while they were waiting, they decided they were going to drive me crazy. So 24 hours a day teacher was fairly impractical. And by Christmas, I just wanted to do something else. It was a very difficult year to get jobs, jobs in teaching. That would have been 1977. I don't know if that was a year of high unemployment in Canada, but there was no teacher shortage at all at that point. So I thought, what can I do to maximize my chances of getting a job? One thing I did was I applied to Nigeria. Surely they'll take, this was just after, do you remember how they slaughtered all those Igbo tribesmen? They starved them? Well, you gotta forgive. I wanted a job in Nigeria. What else? Northern Saskatchewan, it was either Alberta or Saskatchewan. I applied there, I probably would have gotten the job. In the end, a friend got it. I applied to Australia. I applied to Labrador City in Labrador. And let me remember, 20 people applied for the job. They interviewed 8, and somebody else got it. And I couldn't even get a job in Labrador City. So I decided what I would try to do was get a book on Circular 14, which was the list of books that can be used in the Ontario educational system. And I started to do a book on William Lyon Mackenzie and the Rebellion of 1837. It was about the first mayor of Toronto. It was an action story. So it was up my alley in a certain way. And I've got 4 pages up there, but the style I used was reminiscent of Classics Illustrated. And remember I spoke of talking heads and characters that stand like this? Well, that's what I've got here. That's all I could do. The composition was all right. You know, it wasn't out and out Well, yeah, okay, it was bad. I might have been turned down by Classics Illustrated if I had applied there at the time. But it was the best I could do. And for a lot of people, it was good enough. So let's see what I've got. There's 1 page, 2 pages, very flat. Okay. And I got about 20 pages of that done before I landed my job at General Wolf. And I landed it because, hey, this kid applied to Nigeria. He'll probably work out okay here teaching the vocational kids. Hey, this guy wants to be on Circular 14. He's got a bit of ambition. Maybe he'll have some other ideas that he could show in the school. So I stopped doing it. And then one day, my old friend, Mark Buck, who not only went into fine arts with me, he also went into teachers college with me, saw it and he said, oh, he owned an art gallery at the time, right across from the Art Gallery of Ontario. And Mark said, you know, I think there's a gallery that would take this. So together we went down to the Market Gallery of the City of Toronto Archives. And having worked in a gallery had never crossed my mind. I've never pursued it. Some people pursue it all their lives and don't have any luck at all. So I showed it to, could we call the woman a curator? I showed it to the curator, and about 30 seconds later she said, we've got space open in November. And okay, this is how gallery stuff works, eh? So I finished it up. Mark helped me because time was tight. And we dropped the stuff into the gallery well before the show. They framed it. And again, I didn't see this coming, but partly because Art Eggleton was the mayor at the time, and the gallery was owned by the city, and there was an exhibit about the first mayor of Toronto. Art Eggleton came to the opening. So it was important. The Toronto Star did 1 gallery review per week at the time, and they did a full column on this. So, you know, for a one thing, it's not good to fill a 23-year-old kid's head with dreams. They'll believe them. So my head was being filled with dreams. I wasn't about to quit my day job, but I thought, hey, I must have done something important. Now, if you remember James K. Bartleman, James K. Bartleman was the Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada. One day I got a phone call. You know, hello, is this Ron Kasman? Who is this? I am I don't know if he was the curator or the president. There was an organization called the William Lyon Mackenzie Printery in Queenston Heights. Their mission was to build upon William Lyon Mackenzie. So if you go there, they've recreated the way he lived. They have a printing studio in the bottom. And he said, we want to print your book. So how did you find out about it? Asked I. And he said that article on it, on the back of the article was an ad for lawnmowers. I needed a lawnmower and I saved the lawnmower ad. And I was very surprised to turn it over. So sure, go ahead, print it. And then he called me very soon after and said, you got to come down to the gallery. Do you own a suit? Of course I own a suit. I'm a school teacher. We all own one suit. So the thing was, James K. Bartleman, the Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada, was, what did he call it now? He was trying to improve literacy across Ontario. He called it the Crusade for Literacy. And he decided that my book would be part of the Crusade for Literacy. So this surprised me a great deal. I put on the suit. I shook his hand. I think there were a dozen photos taken of me shaking this guy's hand. And it was in every small town newspaper in Southern Ontario. And when they did that, here's what they did. Here, I'll show you. It's printed in black and white, but they all there's a little bit of color in there. So that's the cover. I colored the cover. They printed a very small number in leather bound, and I only got one. But I got probably 100 of the paper bound ones. So I call this my first graphic novel. Now it's only 38 pages. No, it's got to be 36 pages. No, well, it could be either 36 or 40 pages. I'm not sure. That's hardly a graphic novel, but it's longer than the standard comic book, which was only 20 pages. Plus, it got so much press at the time, and it came out in a leather-bound edition. So I call this my first graphic novel. And I still could not draw well at all. Do I see a hand? Louder, please.
Did they pay for the book?
No, I got a tax dodge. Want to know how much? $5,000. Okay, what they did was they asked me what each page was worth, what the writing was worth, the lettering, etc. And then they multiplied it by the number of pages. Then I believe they cut it, Lonnie would know this, I think they cut it in half. I think that sounds right? So I got 50% of whatever that number was.
Oh, as a tax credit, you mean?
Yes,
Yeah.
and as I recall, it was it couldn't have been $5,000, but that's the number I remember.
You get around 25 back after time.
Okay, so I didn't get paid, but it was certainly to my financial advantage, okay? So I kept doing these things. I inked. First you come up with a story. Based on the story, you do drawings in pencil, which I could do. You know, we've got a whole bunch of professional artists in the room. For me to say I did it at a professional level would be embarrassing, though I'm sure I could convince some of you it is so. They weren't quite at a professional level. They were at, okay, a very, very low professional level. Can you take that? Can you accept that? Okay, a very low professional level. I could ink better than that. Instead of being very, very low, it was just plain a low professional level for my inking. But there was one thing I could really do well. Somebody has to letter the books. And I compare this to pottery. Like even Michelangelo, if he didn't know how to throw a pot, he couldn't throw a pot. And he might not be interested in learning how to do it. I learned how to letter. And a lot of the guys who were good, genuinely good, either didn't know how to letter or they didn't want to spend their time on it. It's not a lot of fun. There's no glamour in it. Jim Shooter said in a court of law, Jim Shooter was the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics for many years. In a court of law, he said, our letterers make money like surgeons. He lied. They don't. But they get paid okay, like on an hourly basis. It's okay. But there's no glory in it. Your hand cramps up after about an hour. But on the plus side of it, you're part of a community. It doesn't take long to letter stuff. So even with a family and a day job, I could churn out lettering and make a bit of extra money. And I'd even get guest passes at major conventions for doing this. So I did it. And if there was a downside to it, I was in the Rolodex of letterers. I couldn't get out of the Rolodex of letterers into the inker Rolodex, let alone the penciler Rolodex. But I kept my hand in. Okay. Now, I used to do seminars with junior high school kids on how to draw comics. And while they were drawing their comics, I would be doing my own drawings. I read books, I took classes, I got better over the years. And I gave most of these, I would have done maybe 50 of these while I was doing the seminars. I've only kept 3. And I don't know what you can see from the back. But what I contend, is this isn't bad. You know, when you start comparing it to the William Lyon Mackenzie work, It's leagues and leagues beyond it. The inking, I think, is maybe good. The drawing is all right. I mean, you compare it to that John Buscema Silver Surfer I showed you, and you realize just how far you can go in this. Oh, and by the way, when Buscema did that Silver Surfer, Stanley didn't like it at all. Yeah, you've probably heard the stories. Yeah. It is brilliant. Brilliant is the word to describe his Silver Surfers. But I could draw, at this point, I could draw a little bit. I could keep my head held high as a drawer, and I could knock these things off thoughtlessly, which is what I did for the kids. Oh yeah, there's one other thing. My fake Jeff Jones drawings from earlier in the talk. I was involved in a convention called Cosmic Con, just like the book title. We had a lot of trouble coming. I would come up with a book title. I'd send it to Paul, and Paul would say, "Not so great," and I knew it every time. I knew it, and then I said to Paul, "I think I've got a good one." I only had one title in me. It was Cosmic Con, which is what we named a convention at York University in 1972. And I said, "It'll work for that. It'll work for the book too." And Paul agreed. We then came up with another one. The other one was Other Gods Before Me. And Paul, who knows much more about this sort of thing than I do, said, "You don't have to have other gods before me. People will get it. Gods before me will work." And then Jim Whaley came up with one. And it was Beyond Belief. And he said that to me, and I said, that's not bad. So we had 3 decent titles. We gave them to the publisher, and the publisher chose the Cosmic Con. And I told you these things were published in a fanzine in London, Ontario. So the fanzine came out during Cosmic Con. And a guy who was just starting out in comics, who became much better known later on, he saw them. And he said, and I think I'm quoting, but I have to explain it. He said, "This guy's too good for comics." And that got back to me. But I know exactly what he meant. What he meant was, this guy has to have his composition absolutely perfect for it to work. He's got to have every shadow in the exact right place. If the texture isn't just the way it's supposed to be, it's not going to look right. This doesn't work on everything. It works on a drawing that looks good with a light on top of it. It doesn't look good on much else. And I knew what he meant because I knew my limitations. And if I had tried to get into comics at that point, I would have made I wouldn't have even, if anyone would have actually been foolish enough to give me a script, I wouldn't have even been able to complete it because there would be too many drawings in there to do that my style couldn't be applied to. And I'll put that back. Okay. Then again with the stories. I used to lift a lot of weights. I was very strong, and I'm actually a qualified phys ed teacher. And I have taught phys ed on a few occasions. Usually art was what I knew. Now let me see if I can remember the list. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't drink coffee, I don't have high cholesterol, I don't have high blood pressure, I wasn't overweight at the time. Now, I must confess, but then I wasn't overweight. And I exercised daily. Now I think that's the list. I was the least likely person to end up with a heart problem. I got a heart problem. The heart problem could not be dealt with through medication. So they did something else to me, but I was too unconscious to remember what it was. What did they do? They stuck this thing up my leg to my heart. What was it called?
Angiogram.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it was supposed to take 4.5 hours. It took 5.5. I didn't care. I was out. And that didn't work either. It was supposed to be 92 to 94% successful. Didn't work on me. So there I was. And I got on television because of this. I got on the Learning Channel because here's a phys ed teacher who doesn't do any of that stuff, and he's still a mess. So I ended up with a pacemaker, and when they put in the pacemaker, they also put in pericarditis. And that's one part of the Bob Dylan film they didn't show. Bob Dylan, actually after the film ends, later in his life, Bob Dylan got pericarditis. And I'm a big Dylan fan, so I even follow his disorders. He got pericarditis, and he said, for a while there, I thought I was gonna go visit Elvis, who'd been dead for a while at the time. I couldn't breathe. When you got pericarditis, there's a swelling of the heart lining. And every time you breathe, your lungs go up against that swollen heart lining, and it really hurts. And you have to sleep sitting up, okay? So I was off school for 4 months. I was sick enough so that I couldn't go into work, but not so sick that I couldn't sit at the drawing board. So this is the perfect disease. And when you think you might visit Elvis or whoever the equivalent is, you start worrying and you think, well, there's some things I want to do with my life. I'd like to be a much better artist than I am. So I started refining my drawing, and I started losing a lot of the lines that I showed you in drawings like this one. I reverted to sort of a Classics Illustrated style, but not a Classics Illustrated style of stiff bodies and talking heads. I also simplified the eyes and decided that I will not tell the story through expression on the face. I'll tell the story through the word balloons, but I'll have a simplified face. So at the time, this had a circulation of 27,000 per month. And I sent my stuff in, and the guy phoned me, and he said, can we use it? And I said, yeah. And I think that was the first time I ever sold a story that I had done everything for. And I was 44 years old, okay, not a kid. And I started teaching at Queen Elizabeth Park when I was 42. So I'd done a lot of lettering, I'd done a little bit of inking, I had single drawings published all over the place, but, and I did have comics published, but I never got paid for them. This was one that I actually got paid for, and it was seen by, 27,000 is pretty good, at least at the time it was. He wanted a regular comic from me that would be once a month, which is impossible to do when you're teaching and you have a family. So I had to turn that down. But Rick Taylor, Rick's in Mississauga, and Rick has also helped me over the years with my art, as have many of you. Rick couldn't come in. He said he's too old to be driving on the QEW on a night like this. So he said there's a magazine called Negative Burn, and I'd heard of it. It was fairly popular. And he said, they'll probably take your work. So I started doing stories, 6-pagers, 8-pagers, just short ones. And they took everything I gave them. And I was in good company. There were a lot of good people in the magazine, but they liked oddball stuff. Not that they didn't like stuff that looked like it belonged in a Marvel comic or a DC comic. So I did work for them for a couple of years. And just to tell you that it's a precarious industry, when he wrote X-Men comics, and he stopped doing that, became a publisher, and there was a decline in the comic industry. This was probably mid-90s. And he had to stop doing that. He went back to doing construction work, and then he went back to Marvel and is drawing major comic books again. Okay. I didn't really have a method, but you can just piece things together for an 8-page or 12-page story. I was going to do a 200-page story. And I talked to a guy, and he said, well, I can recommend a couple of books to you. And if I don't think anyone here is going to pick up comics just because of this, but this is how to write screenplays. On my block, and the numbers only go up to 99 on my block. At the time I got this book, there were 5 people living on my block who were writing screenplays. I'm just looking for Blair there. There were. Everybody has a screenplay in them. I didn't have a screenplay in me. I also thought it's futile. There are only about 250 Hollywood movies that come out per year, and at least 80% of them are written by people who've already written screenplays, and most of the other 20% are professional writers. Unless you're really good, it's just not something that happens much. But it also applies to long comic books. And this became part of my map when I did it. I did. Got another school teacher in the room. Also this one, story by Robert McKee. And what he says, I mean, he says it in a thick book, but he says, look into your life. You've done all kinds of things that are interesting. Now take those things, build up on them. Your life is not interesting, but you can take the things that happened and relate them to other things and expand upon them, and you will have an interesting story. So between the two, I was able to do a much longer story. So the next book that I had was this, Tower of the Comic Book Freaks. And this was done for a company in Detroit. It sold about 2,000 copies. And I'm going to give you another lesson in publishing and in math. It sold for $19.95. From that $19.95, you've got to pay a printer. You've got to pay shipping. You've got to pay a distributor to get it around to the stores. You've also got to pay duties if it's coming into Canada. And and the store gets a significant discount. I don't know what it is here, but for comics, it's between 40 and 65%. Unless some people are shaking their head, yeah, okay, 40 to 65% is fair. What that leaves from $18.95 is $1 for me and $1 for the publisher. That's it. If you're selling something, if you're big time, I'm obviously not. If you're big time, if it's on the New York Times bestseller list, if it's selling a couple 100,000, you're making significant dough. And you don't know what's going to happen with it. The chances of this going anywhere it went far. I was hoping for 600. If it sold 600, I would have said that's a success. It sold 2,000. It also the book did get nominated, but because of the book, I got nominated there were 9 nominees for Best Cartoonist in Canada that year. I got nominated. I didn't expect to win. The whole idea of me even being on the list. I read the list and I thought, I'm in good company. These are good people. I'm with them at the moment. I'm lucky just to be there. But I thought it was a good story. I'm still proud of it. So soon after it came out, the publishing company was doing things they called monographs. They would do a bunch of short stories by a single creator. And I gave them a bunch of stories, and the publisher said, well, I don't know, I got to give it to the editor, see what the editor thinks about it, I'll get back to you soon. And this is usually a way of saying, I don't want to insult you to your face, but we have no interest in your book idea at all. That's what I expect when I hear that. So he gave it to the editor, and the editor said they are compelling stories. He didn't want to use, I think 2 of them were cast aside, but they printed the rest of them. And it came out right at the start of COVID. So it sold, it barely made minimum order. It did get circulated through the company's called Diamond. Diamond did circulate it, but it barely made minimum order. And the only evidence I have that anyone even read the thing was I went to a used bookstore and there was my book in the used bookstore. So somebody read it, they didn't think it was worthy of keeping in their collection, and they sold it to the used bookstore for a couple of bucks.
They passed it forward.
I was happy.
Yeah, they just paid it forward.
It gave me evidence. I felt like a somebody when I saw it in the used bookstore. But it hardly sold anything at all. Oh, I'll also mention this. If you get into any facet of this, find an honest publisher. The fella in Detroit, not that I haven't heard any negative stories about him, but I haven't heard many negative stories about him at all. He'd been in business for 25 years, and if you can do this for 25 years and not have people spitting between saying your first name and your last name, you've done a good job. So I got a good publisher in Detroit. I've got a good publisher in Winnipeg right now. Oh yeah, with this one, it took me 17 tries. I thought, hey, I'm pretty good. I just finished a story. I'm proud of the story. It's a good story. And then you get rejection after rejection after rejection. And I had a friend, Rob, I still have a friend, Rob Walton. He sent me a note before this. He's out in Niagara Falls right now. Rob said, I've got a publisher. He'll like this thing. His publisher didn't like it. So even with the connections that I had, I couldn't get anywhere. And then number 17 said, yeah, we'll take it. So I thought, I'm gonna sell this one awfully fast. It's a great book. I really love it. But it's not. It's the problem is the big publishers often want something that's connected through multimedia. An old TV show, something to do with Star Wars perhaps, something everybody knows about, a property that's lost its trademark or copyright, I'm not sure, like Sherlock Holmes. That's what they're looking for. If they can't find that, what they want is someone who's kind of a big name. So the name of the author will sell the book. And I remain nobody. So the big guys didn't want me at all. There were publishers that were actually too small for me. And politely, they're called boutique publishers, and some of them become major publishers later on. But I really didn't want, it's 203 pages plus another 30 or so pages of additional material. I didn't want the thing sold at community book fairs and have under 100 sales at the end. So after 60 tries, I landed with a company where I respected what they had been doing. And I don't think I'm much better than I was before, maybe no better at all. But I've got a better publisher who's putting more energy into it and has produced something that looks rather nice. And that's the end of the story. What I hear is people who do this, I don't know how long I've been talking. I used to say to my students, 10 minutes, just give me 10 minutes. And at the end of they'd be looking at the clock. It's
an hour and 3 minutes. Now
it's 7:34, which means I've been going on for about an hour, which is about as long as anybody could stand. If I gave you a break to get some food, knowing groups of people as the way I do, you'll never go back and sit down. So I'm going to try to keep this to less than 5 minutes. The book is about cults, and looking at your faces, many of you are about my age. The book is set in 1968, and in 1968, there was a strip that I call Cult Row in Toronto. It went from the Krishna Temple, which is still there, along past the Church of Scientology, over to the subways where the Process Church of the Final Judgment sent their beautiful women to try to get people in, through Yorkville, where I don't know why, but Yorkville had the Eastern cults. They like the Eastern cults. And then you go along Yonge Street, and you'd find half a dozen other cults there. And I talk about what a cult is in the afterword and what it was like in Toronto at that time. There's still cults out there. There are different kinds of cults. Some are religious cults, and that's what people tend to be fascinated most by. But there are also business cults. NXIVM. Thank you. That was a business cult, but it still had the cult model. What's the group in the United States that thinks Hillary Clinton is doing something horrible out of a pizza parlor? QAnon. Okay, that also fits the cult model. And you don't have to stretch it to see that there can be family cults where people have beliefs that, by family I mean like a family of 4, a family of 3 or 6. The whole family will have very, very odd beliefs, and it's difficult to go against whoever's running the family. And the beliefs are stuck to for a long, long time. So what I do in the afterword is I talk about what a cult is, the evolution of what cults meant in my mind, and how it's a real word. And I mention a professor I had. His name was Theodore Olson. And Theodore Olson was really sharp. I mean, even as professors go, he was one of the sharpest ones I was ever taught by. And Theodore Olson told us that cult is just a word to describe a religion. Any religion could be described as a cult. Now, at the time, I respected Dr. Olson very much. I still do. But I think he was wrong on that. I think he was taking all the meaning out of a perfectly good word. So I talk about the different ways one can look at a cult and what a cult actually is. And I don't think I am going to go through that because I think my time is very up and I'll lose my audience very soon. So I thank you all for coming out. It's really nice of you to come out. I was quite scared about this. Jim had a great idea for a launch, and it still might happen. There was a movie made 30 years ago, perhaps, called Ticket to Heaven. Yeah. So what we were going to do was get a repertory movie theater in Hamilton to play the movie. And I would do the pre-movie show. I would talk about cults beforehand. We'd advertise it as such.
Still may happen.
I also know another guy. He's got 2,000 YouTube followers. It's not the world, but it's 2,000 people. And he does talks usually about Scientology quite regularly. And I talked to him, and here's what we decided. We were going to go to where all these cult centers were based on Davenport Avenue, Yorkville, Yonge Street. He remembers where they all were. And I was going to set up a little table in the front, and I was not going to sell books, but I was going to have the appearance of being a bookseller in front, and we would do a little talk about the specific cult that was there. When I was told store cult, I thought, my goodness, it's coming up really fast. It's on a weeknight. Toronto rush hour is no fun. But I thank all you people for trusting me and coming out and sitting through my talk for as long as you have. Thank you.